What I want to talk about is Joe Biden's inaugural poem, the poem he used to usher himself into the White House. That was The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. And I want to look at it from the point of view of some poetic technique, rhythm, rhyme, a sense of sense and imagery, the meaning of the poem. And I want to compare it with supposedly the worst poem ever written by supposedly the worst poet ever. That was McGonagall from a century and a half ago. We still read him today because I think this poem and the way that critics and celebrities alike have thrown themselves onto the ground in order to fawn over this poem and also this lady. It is an interesting little drill down into our times, particularly how far the BLM multicultural madness has got a grip on us, and also the effect that it has had on an artistic class without culture and an intellectual class that can't think. Now, you can find a transcript of the poem. You can go onto YouTube and get it. That's where I'm going to play it from YouTube. The plaudits that this poem has attracted are universal. I don't know anyone who has come out against it. Everyone has said how wonderful it was. The Guardian led the charge, saying that headline, "An inspiration to us all. Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem stirs hope and awe." And then Michelle Obama saying, with her strong and poignant words, Amanda Gorman reminds us of the power we each hold in upholding our democracy. Keep shining, Amanda. And everyone came out in favour. Barack Obama, Oprah, Anderson Cooper. If you want to get really nauseated, watch Anderson Cooper fawning over Amanda Gorman on his show. It's really unseemly. I bet you can't watch it till the end. And the most disturbing one, I think, is Will Gompertz. He's the BBC's arts editor since 2009, and he came out with fulsome praise. It was a beautifully paced, well-judged poem for a special occasion. It will live long beyond the time and space of the moment. Amanda Gorman delivers her piece with grace. The words it contained will resonate with people the world over, today, tomorrow, and far into the future. What I'm going to be saying is this is classic Emperor's New Clothes. Everyone is praising it because everyone else is praising it. It's almost literal Emperor's New Clothes, and this is one of the items that the new Emperor of America is cladding his presidency in. It shows how deeply BLM diversity has taken hold. The feeling that you get from the poem, you get a number of things. It is clunky. Also, she does use a poetic technique. She hammers it home with a mallet so that it breaks other elements of the poem, but particularly the meaning. The meaning tends to go out of the window. You get a feeling of being shoved around, told what to think and feel by an overconfident, overpraised, I think imperious and simple-minded. There's nothing wrong with being simple-minded. Blake could write poetry that appeared to be simple-minded, although he wasn't. Wordsworth could appear to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But also, I have to say, a mildly brutish lady. You get that feeling of being shoved around. The word I would use is bronze pounded. She uses that word. She talks about her bronze pounded chest. None of the people lavishing praise on this poem has explained that. Bronze pounded means pounded with a bronze. A bronze is a little statuette, a bust of someone, usually of someone official, cast in bronze, like a Roman senator or an emperor or a poet laureate. And you get the feeling with this poem that you are being hit over the head or in the chest by a bronze. She's picking up a bronze and pounding you with it. That's the feeling that this poem gives you. But anyway, don't take my word for it, judge for yourself.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world.
You get that? And the world. So not just America, all of us. So I have every right to object to this. She is lecturing me.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade?
Okay, it begins there with unnecessary pompous, slightly dictatorial verbiage. When the day comes, we ask ourselves, no. That's like the politician who says, does this mean, I hear you cry, that we should move forward and not instead of backwards? No, that is redundant language. She doesn't have to say that. All she has to say is, where can we find light? And also, you don't find light in Never-Ending Shade. Never-Ending Shade contains no light. This is meaningless. There is a lack of sense, and this is a constant theme throughout the poem. It doesn't make sense. You can see her not investigating, not going any further to see if it makes sense. And something that doesn't make sense is, a word for it is stupid. And if you are in the habit of constantly saying things that make no sense, unless you've got some mental diagnosis, then stupid is a reasonable adjective to apply to you. It is meaningless and very clunky what she is writing here. What she is saying was said much better by Gerard Manley Hopkins, who said it in respect of his almost suicidal, terrible depression. I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. That's a good one to bear in mind because of the use of alliteration, which she tries to use. He uses it with extreme skill, so it supports the poem and makes it extremely powerful. Very, very good poem, one of a series of poems, the terrible sonnets that he wrote. Well worth reading. This is, there's no comparison between these two poets in ability or technique or anything else.
The loss we carry, a sea we must wade.
Okay, there. So you get the rhyme there, and Never-Ending Shade, a sea we must wade. Again, what's the meaning there? You don't carry a loss. You suffer a loss. A sea we must wade. You don't wade a sea. Who's forcing you to wade a sea? No, this is just nonsense being put forward because it can rhyme. Shade with wade. It doesn't have meaning. Again, and I have to give her some credit. She is at least rhyming here. There isn't a consistent rhyme scheme in this poem. When rhymes come, you get the impression of her cramming them in, smashing them in, just to appear clever. The worst poem in history, Willie McGonagall. Now, I want to compare her poem with The Tay Bridge Disaster by Willie McGonagall. He's reputed to be the worst poet in history, and his poem, The Tay Bridge Disaster, is reputed to be the worst poem in history. But he had a rhythmic pattern and he had a rhyme pattern, and so you compare tension, it moves, it kind of dances, even though it's entertaining to read because it isn't very good. So The Tay Bridge Disaster, I'll read you the first stanza. You compare this with what she's wrote and see which you prefer. Beautiful railway bridge of the silvery Tay, alas, I am very sorry to say that 90 lives have been taken away on the last Sabbath day of 1879, which will be remembered for a very long time. Okay, there's charm there. He's modest. He means no one any harm. I think he really is affected by the fact that all these people have died. But you see, he has a rhythm and rhyme scheme there that you can follow. She doesn't.
Braved the belly of the beast. Carry a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast.
You see that we've braved the belly of the beast. What does that mean? That there is no sense there. That is a pompous cliche. She's using a cliche in order to sound grandiose. It's clunky. It's unintelligent. It's not used because it has any meaning. It's not there in order to move you, because you don't brave the belly of the beast. The belly of the beast is something you live in. You might brave the fangs or the claws of the beast, but not the belly of the beast. It's she's just trying to jam poetic cliches together, and this, I think, this is simple-minded. This is unskilled.
We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is.
Okay, you get that? Another little rhyme there. Peace, justice, no, they don't rhyme. Okay, what she's really doing there, what I think she's found is that just is and justice, oh, they sound similar. Maybe I can weave those into a poem and jam those next to each other. That is wordplay, and you can see with the air quotes she has to use when she's dealing with that. If something requires air quotes in order to give it meaning, I mean it's clownish, it's buffoonish to use air quotes like that. But if you have to do that, it means that what you've written doesn't really have a lot of meaning, because justice and justice, they're not easily jammed together. This is kind of oafish, but this is what she's doing just to yoke together things that she thinks sound clever. And what it reminds me of is the old English saying, he who would pun would pick a pocket. A pun like that, it burgles your brain. And what you find in, what this shows on her part is a lack of self-awareness, because in English literature, that kind of wordplay is often cheeky, subversive and undermining, as is an outrageous rhyme scheme, which sort of she kind of uses later on. But that wordplay is there to subvert. I can think of an example from Tristram Shandy, where Uncle Toby is being flirted with by a local widow, and she claims she's got something in her eye, or she's trying to flirt with him, and he doesn't get it. He's not aroused at all. And the writer refers to Uncle Toby saying, Uncle Toby smokes a pipe as well, and the writer refers to Uncle Toby saying, I see him yonder with his pipe pendulous in his hand, basically describing how unaroused Uncle Toby is. And that's the kind of wordplay. It's very subversive, very, very cheeky. Or in Shakespeare, in Troilus and Cressida, where all the pompous generals hear a war alarm. They hear a trumpet going off, and they all say in unison, "The Trojans' trumpet." And you get the impression that one of them, Ulysses, is not saying the Trojans' trumpet. He's saying the Trojan strumpet, meaning that Helen of Troy is the Trojan strumpet, meaning the whole reason for the war is stupid, and there is no point to this war. So again, that wordplay is meant to be subversive, cheeky, comical. She doesn't have the self-awareness to realise that. She thinks wordplay is clever. I think because she isn't really that skilled at her job. You get the impression she's very assertive, extremely confident, imperious is the word I use, but not really very bright. Okay, she is overpraised.
And yet the dawn is hours before we knew it, somehow we do it.
Yeah, do you hear that? Knew it, do it. Yeah, that's the rhyme scheme. But again, it's meaningless. How is the dawn yours before you know it? And somehow you do it. Somehow you do what? What that reminds me of was when I was a little boy at school. If someone said something that rhymed, you'd say to him, "You're a poet and you don't know it," and you'd think that was kind of funny. And that's what you want to say to her, because it's sort of just so silly. It's just meaningless verbiage put together because it rhymes. Okay, and that coupled with this "somehow we do it," I think when she says we, she means I. Somehow I do it. It's over assertive and pompous. Pomposity. This is a very pompous poem.
Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished.
Okay. Do you hear that? We've weathered and witnessed a nation. Again, that doesn't really make any sense. How does a nation weather and witness a nation? It's how do you weather and witness yourself? How do you weather yourself? This is her using alliteration. Alliteration is where you use words which have the same letter at the beginning of them. So the next word has the same letter at the beginning of it. Weathered and witnessed. But here it's being used in a cheap, clunky, gratuitous way. It's uncalled for, and that makes it heavy. Alliteration is intended to be used in order to enhance the meaning. You don't substitute it for the meaning. It's not instead of the meaning. It's meant to lend sort of power and underpinning to what you're trying to say, to the emotion that you're trying to evoke and generate in your reader. And this is a constant theme throughout this poem. It's as if someone has said to her, "Hey, there's this really cool theme called alliteration. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. It's really great. It sounds great. Why don't you use it?" And then you are being hit over the head with it, or bronze pounded with it, okay? Bronze pounded, the word that she uses later in the poem. Now, if you compare this with really very great writers, Shakespeare used alliteration in a way that's almost tended to be so subtle you don't notice it. So you say Romeo and Juliet, you watch it and you think, why is this so moving? Why am I so moved with the sensuality of the language? Why am I so moved by this poem? And it's partly, it's because of the technique he uses, the rhythm, and sometimes the rhyme, and the alliteration that he uses. An example that I'd give is when Romeo and Juliet finally get to spend a night together, and the dawn comes, and Romeo has to leave, otherwise he'll get killed. And he says, Juliet, I've got to go. And she says, oh no, it's still night. It was the nightingale and not the lark. Believe me, love, it was the nightingale. And he says, it was the lark. So he joins in with that alliteration, that L sound. But it's extremely subtle and kind of mellifluous, and it just makes it so moving and romantic. It's beautiful use of language. Watch it on YouTube yourself. You have to agree. And similarly, you can see it with. I'll give two more examples from Shakespeare and another one from Gerard Manley Hopkins. One of the other ones from Shakespeare is in The Merchant of Venice. Portia, who's loaded, gets married to Bassanio. And she turns to him at the wedding and says, you can see me, I'm just a simple girl. And yet for you, I would be treble 20 times myself. And that gentle alliteration, the devotion she's expressing, that the alliteration, it enhances that sense of devotion, but also it unlocks the problem play, which is about the contracts of love and contractual terms. And it's Shakespeare saying, remember this line. He's giving it added punch so it sticks in your mind, because it's sort of it's at the heart of the problem play. And another example is in another disturbing play like The Merchant of Venice. That's Measure for Measure, where Barnardine, who's about to be executed, he says, no, you're not going to execute me. I will have more time to prepare me, or they shall beat out my brains with billets. Again, this is another signal, I take it as another signal from Shakespeare at the heart of the play, just unlocking the problem play in a scene you'd otherwise forget, saying, remember this line. But it's done with subtlety. If you want to see a less, I'm almost saying less subtle, a less unobtrusive method, a more obvious method of alliteration, read Gerard Manley Hopkins' The Wind Hover, where it's, alliteration is used in a muscular, assertive way. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dapple dawn-drawn falcon. Again, it's a much tougher, firmer use of alliteration, but as with Shakespeare, it serves the meaning, it is subservient to the meaning. Every word tells, and you don't put a word in simply because it begins with the same letter that another word begins with. You use that alliteration in order to serve the meaning. With Amanda Gorman's poem, the opposite is happening. She's using a word just because it begins with the same letter that another word begins with, whether or not it means anything.
The successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one.
Okay, there is no rhyme scheme there, there is no rhythm there, there's very little meaning. What she's saying is, look at me, I'm in front of you reciting a poem for a president. That's what she's saying. And that somehow we're living in these great times where someone like me can be reciting a poem for you. Well, that's totally circular. That is pompous. That is someone butting in, forcing themselves into the conversation. It's clumsy, it's self-important, it's self-referential. It's look at me, it's gauche, lumpish, meat-fisted. These are the adjectives. The one I would use is incompetent and also clunky. Clunky keeps coming up as a way to describe this poem. Again, this is you being, or the reader being bronze pounded. It's as if she's taking a bronze of herself and pounding you with it. Now, Willie McGonagall, the worst poet in history, he would never have done that. On his gravestone, he had put on his gravestone It was so modest and charming. I am your gracious majesty, ever faithful to thee, William McGonagall, the poor poet that lives in Dundee. Okay, what a nice, charming man. He would never have got up and spoken the way that she spoke. And by the way, her boasting there is at the expense of any poetry. There's no poetic technique at all in those couple of lines, so far as I can tell.
And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but
see those hand movements? Yeah, do you like those hand movements? Yeah, oh, great.
that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect.
No one's saying you are. No, that doesn't follow. It makes no sense. Simply because you are far from polished, that does not mean that therefore you are striving to form a union that is perfect. That is verbiage for its own sake. What you do, that is, again, that's using alliteration at the expense of everything else. Here's a poetic technique, alliteration, hammering it through with a mallet, smashing out everything else, including the meaning and including the rhyme, as far as I can tell. Polished, pristine, alliteration. Now, that is not poetry. Prose can do that. There was a poet, Vernon Scannell, who was sometimes called the best poet laureate that England never had. He said that simply because text doesn't reach the right-hand side of the page, that doesn't make it poetry. And I would say simply because you use words that begin with the same letter, that doesn't make it poetry either.
We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man.
Did you hear that? Compose a country committed to all cultures, colours, characters and conditions of man. That's 7 C's all strung together. That is clunky. That is really heavy. What that reminds me of, that is so ridiculous, that reminds me of a spitting image episode I saw many years ago, where Neil Kinnock is writing a speech with a bit of help from Roy Hattersley, and he says, "Oh, we believe in the compassion and caring and compassion of socialism." And then Roy Hattersley says, "But Neil, you've used the word compassion twice. You need to use another word." So Neil says, "Right, Roy, find me another word that begins with C." So Roy Hattersley, he rifles through the dictionary, and under C he finds the word courgettes. So Neil Kinnock then ends up giving a speech saying, "We believe in the compassion, the caring and the courgettes of socialism." It's at that level. It is so... It's sort of it's banal just to show, look how many words I can think of that begin with C. That's pre-adolescent. Now, skilled writers, when they're using alliteration, they do it so you almost don't notice. A very famous line from Shakespeare: "Creeps in this petty pace from day to day." Very slight, very subtle, but it enhances the meaning. But this that she's doing, it's just deliberately heavy-handed and clunky.
And so we lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside.
Okay, so what I can give her a little bit of credit there. I think what she's doing is making an allusion or echoing JFK's inaugural speech, where he used a technique called chiasmus, where ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, or let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. So we close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. She actually can't do it. I don't think she has the mental discipline to do it. But instead it's kind of trite and banal and hackneyed, putting our differences aside. That's not an original phrase. That's something that sounds It sounds a little bit of poetic. It's incidentally the last thing she's doing. She is not doing it. She is triumphal, as you'll see later in the poem. She is saying, we have won, our enemies are evil and extraordinarily destructive, and we have triumphed over them because of our own good qualities, or my own good qualities. And this is it's poor. Again, the word that comes to mind is clunky, as does the rhyme scheme divide aside. Okay, divide aside. Other than that, there is no rhythm there. It's she's forcing through that technique, chiasmus, at the expense of pretty much everything else.
We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all.
Okay, more wordplay. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. Do you get it? That's a pun. Okay, that reminds me of the old phrase, he who would pun would pick a pocket, because a pun kind of burgles your brain. You get that feeling, you think, oh God, someone's burgled my brain. I've had someone's pickpocketed me in the brain. And there is no rhythm there at all. Again, she extends it, harm, harmony. Do you get it? Harm, harmony. Okay, I make some allowance here. Again, I think what she's doing is she's making an allusion, another reference to another inauguration speech, and that was Abraham Lincoln, much, much more skilled than I think she'll ever be, where he said, with malice toward none, with charity for all. Beautifully rhythmic, cadent language, expressed expressed the feeling of charity very well. I think she's trying to echo that, but with harmony for all, with harm to none and harmony for all. It's kind of, she's not really echoing him. She's imitating him, which is not very good. It's not impressive.
The globe, if nothing else, say this is true.
Let the globe, right, that means you and me, that means all of us. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. This is her being pompous. It's redundant. Why? She's saying, hey, you, everyone out there, you better agree with me. This is imperative. Now, is it true what she's going to say? Well, she's basically saying that there is no question about this. This is part of her, I think, her imperiousness, that it just rubs you up the wrong way.
That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried.
Do you get it? Yeah. Alliteration, yeah. Okay, alliteration alliteration was originally used before the days of literacy. People would use rhyme and rhythm so that people could remember poetry, and alliteration was part of that. In old Anglo-Saxon poetry, there was a very deliberate structure that was used. The first few years, so the first 3 words would begin with the same letter, and then the last word, or the first 3 or 4 words, would have the same letter. The last word, the word that rhymes, would begin with a different letter, and it was meant to help people remember the poem, because you didn't have writing. As literacy spread, that purpose faded away, and the purpose of alliteration became to support meaning, to add to the emotion, so that the alliteration wasn't an end in itself. But something I will say here is that at least I'll give her credit for creating some rhythm and rhyme. Okay.
Will forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Okay,
there is also hypocrisy here as well as inconsistency. Inconsistency actually is bad in a poem. You start to think, well, what's going on here? Where's the theme? But it's also just hypocrisy, and that's annoying, because she is not. She is quite happy to sow division as long as she is triumphant.
Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid.
Okay, Scripture tells us. Now, English literature is full of scriptural references. Let's say from measure for measure again, like doth quit like, and measure still for measure, where the Duke is making a scriptural reference in order to lend power to the force of his judgment on Angelo. It's or in one of John Donne's Holy Sonnets, again well worth reading. He says at the end of the poem, "For that, teach me how to repent, for that's as good as if thou had sealed my pardon with thy blood," taking the scriptural reference to the blood of Christ, but then creating an image of a document, instead of being sealed with red sealing wax and stamped, having the red sealing wax stamped, it is you put Christ's blood on the document and then you stamp that, a violent, arresting image, which totally transforms the nature of the poem. If you understand the biblical, the scriptural reference he's making, what they don't do is say, the Bible tells us, the Bible says this, the Bible says that. I mean, the Bible tells us that everyone's going to sit under his own fig tree and no one's going to be afraid. Okay, well, I mean, again, clunky, heavy-footed.
If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That's...
Okay, you're afraid, blade, made, okay. Again, but it doesn't really... What's the meaning? What lies in a blade? Well, nothing lies in a blade because a blade isn't hollow and there isn't room inside a blade. And victory doesn't lie in bridges. Things lie on a bridge or under a bridge, maybe even in the shade of a bridge, but not in a bridge. Again, she's not examining the meaning of what... This might sound like pedantry, but when you use imagery, you have to use imagery that paints a picture. And she's not able to paint a picture because she doesn't appear to have the intelligence to examine the image or to see the images that she's coming up with from the point of view of the reader who hasn't seen those images before.
Is the promise to blade the hill we climb if only we dare it because...
Okay. Now she's saying that is the promise to glade. Glade means to light up. I mean, do you light up a promise? This is poetic language for the sake of it. And whose promise? And who's the promise made to? What is the promise? I assume the promise is that victory will lie in the bridges we've made. Well, I mean, either it does or it doesn't. It's not really something you can promise. And if only we dare to make that promise. It's highfalutin language for the sake of it. It's pompous, self-consciously poetic language.
Because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter a nation rather than share it. Okay, you get the rhyme there. Inherit, repair it, share it. Okay, clunky, clumsy. Again, it doesn't scan. There's no attempt to make it scan. Again, the impression you get is she alights on one poetic technique, and that is here rhyme. That is lousy rhyme. That is bad rhyme. And then everything else goes out the window. That one technique is smashed home at the expense of everything else. It doesn't scan. It doesn't flow. It's not memorable. It's like watching a dancer with two left feet, and it's a bit too important, self-important to be funny. Which is that matters because bad or complicated rhyming, that is something that's used comically in English verse, in English poetry. Byron was famous for this. You get the impression he was having a dig at the seriousness of other romantic poets by being subversive and just cheeky by using his outrageous complicated rhyme scheme. I'll quote some. Don Juan has a lot of this. I'll quote one little bit from Don Juan where he's being comical but very skillful as well. I now mean to be serious. It is time, since laughter nowadays is deemed too serious, a jest at vice by virtues called a crime, and critically held as deleterious. Okay, he's undermining. He's saying, yeah, you other pompous romantic poets, I'm gonna puncture your self-importance. Okay, now this also comes back to what I said about her not putting differences aside. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it. And she goes on to say, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. What she's referring to there is President Trump asking for recounts of the vote, which risked delaying the declaration of Biden's victory.
okay, delaying democracy, and would have shattered our nation, would have shattered the whole nation. Well, okay, this is her saying, we've won. The other side were bad, bad people, but we've now won over them completely. That is not putting your differences aside. That is like, that is putting your differences aside the way we put our differences aside after we bombed and invaded Berlin. Okay? Now.
Would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated.
Did you get that? Succeeded, defeated, yeah. Well, democracy can be. This is pompous. Well, where's the evidence for that? Oh, can never be permanently defeated? Well, I mean, that's abysmal rhythm. There is no rhythm scheme there again. It's just her coming out with pompous pronouncements. But the New Yorker liked it. What you've had with this poem is a lot of celebrities just coming out and saying, oh, you're amazing, it's fantastic, but not explaining why. And the academics, they have a more difficult task because they have to go into more detail. Their job is to explain why it's so good. So what they're choosing to do, what the academics are doing, is explaining why it's so good in impenetrable language that you can't really understand. Now, the New Yorker, if you Google the New Yorker, Amanda Gorman, The Hill We Climb, you'll find this review. Both times the poem raises democracy, in air quotes, or in quotes, both times the poem raises democracy, Gorman pairs the word with delay, which tells us that democracy is a thing expected. Is that right? Oh, right, okay. She ends with a verse of promises and challenges, as rousing as any ever written. Oh, right, as rousing as any ever written. Wow, okay, that's comforting. So this is nonsense. It is not rousing. It is, it's imperious. It can never be permanently defeated. This is her being over assertive. You compare it, again, I compare it with Willie McGonagall's Tay Bridge disaster and the second stanza of that. Just compare the two. 'Twas about 7 o'clock at night, and the wind it blew with all its might, and the rain came pouring down, and the dark clouds seemed to frown, and the demon of the air seemed to say, I'll blow down the bridge of Tay. Okay, you just have you can't help loving William McGonagall. You don't get that feeling with Amanda Gorman.
In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us.
Okay, trust us, you get, no, they don't rhyme, but in her eyes they do. That's the closest she can get to a rhyme. And again, this is pompous. In this truth, in this faith we trust. She feels this is a poetic way of talking because it's a bit, it's highfalutin. No, that's not poetry. And history having its eyes on us, I get the impression, repeatedly throughout this poem, I think when she says us or we, she means me. I say it, you do it. This is pompous, it's corny, it's self-conscious, and again, without any attempt at rhythmic structure.
This is the era of just redemption. We fear that at inception we didn't.
Yeah, redemption, inception, no, they don't rhyme. Okay, what does that mean? This is the era of just redemption. Well, if it is, we can go home and have a party because everyone's getting justly redeemed. We feared it at its inception. Well, why do you fear an era of just redemption at its inception? Again, what she means, this is her not putting differences aside. So what she means is we feared that Donald Trump might win the election. This is her being triumphal and partisan, not trying to build bridges. Okay, and also it's lumbering, and it's kind of, I think the fact that it doesn't really have a lot of meaning means it's stupid, and she keeps coming out with lines that I think are stupid. And the reason I think they're stupid is because they are meaningless.
Not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So,
do you get that? Yeah, an hour, power, chapter, laughter. Okay, yeah, similar cack-handed rhyming.
Oh, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us?
Okay, more pompous, self-important talk. She doesn't just ask the question, she's saying we are all asking the question. I'm asking it, that means everyone else is. When I say it, everyone else agrees. There's an air of pompous imperiousness and clunky imperiousness. Again, like the politician who says, does this mean I hear you cry? I hear you cry. Should we go into the past or into the future? Now, again, I give her some credit. I think she is trying to echo, I would say just imitating JFK's chiasmus method. But I don't think it is skilled simply because it's imitative.
We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be.
Oh, really? Oh, right. That's like saying, that was then, this is now. We won't go back into the past. We will move into the future. Yeah, the clocks have not stopped. We don't have a time machine. That's what. Yeah, it's meaningless. It's irrelevant. And again, pompous and self-important, like the politician who says, shall we move forward or backwards?
A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free.
Alliteration, get it? Yeah.
We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation.
Yep, Amanda, interrupted by intimidation, yeah.
Because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation.
Okay, this is meaningless as well. She's going for alliteration, again, one poetic technique at the expense of everything else. We get it, Amanda. You know how to begin words with the same letter the last word started with, but you don't inherit inaction and inertia. You may inherit the results of inaction and inertia. It's but meaningless, therefore stupid.
Our blunders become their burdens.
No, a blunder doesn't become a burden. The results of a blunder become somebody else's burden.
But one thing is certain.
Get the rhyme scheme? Burden, certain. Yeah, no, I don't get it either.
If we merge mercy with might.
Okay, so she's being pompous and imperious, presumptuous again. One thing is certain, she can't just say what she's got to say and by using skill technique get you to feel it. She's saying, this is certain, you are going to feel this. Constantly throughout this, she's saying, everyone's saying this, people agree this, we're all saying that. One thing is certain, let the whole world say this, that and the other. This is her being imperious and just kind of overconfident and I find kind of dictatorial. And in that way, I think characteristic of what we've seen so far of the whole BLM movement. This is Willie McGonagall without the charm and without the humility.
And the might with rights, then love.
You see those movements there? God.
Becomes our legacy and change our children's birthrights.
Right. Change is not a birthright. Change is something that happens. You can't get away from change whether you like it or not. It will happen. If that's the only birthright you leave to someone, it's a way of saying you're not leaving them anything. If I said to my child, I leave you the passage of time, well, that means there's nothing else. So again, right and birthright, that isn't a rhyme. That's just repeating a word. That is not rhyming.
So let us leave behind a country better than one we were left with every breath from my bronze pounded chest. We will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will.
Okay, this is what I mean about when she says we, she means I. With every breath from my bronze pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. Now, the mask slips there. What you see is her saying, with every breath I've got, with every word I come out, other people are going to act on my words. I'm going to tell them what to act. I'm going to tell them what they should be feeling and thinking and doing, and they will then raise this one wounded world into a wondrous one. We'll make this world into something that I think is good. By the way, you don't raise things into wondrousness. That might sound like pedantry, but she's creating a visual image of raising something into wonder. It's very confused imagery. When you use confused, as George Orwell said, much better man than me, when he said, when you confuse your imagery, you show that you don't know what you mean, and that keeps appearing with her confused imagery. And this thing about being bronze pounded, as I've said, you feel as if she is beating you in the chest with a bronze statuette of herself. You feel bronze, your chest feels bronze pounded with this. And again, and just from a purely poetic point of view, it is clunky assertion and incompetent rhyme. But one organisation that thoroughly liked it was another academic organisation, the Staffordshire University English and Creative Writing Department, no less. Google them, Amanda Gorman, The Hill We Climb. Now they love this part of her poem. Now if you can understand this, you're a better man than me. The lexical texture of the poem, lexical texture, right, that means the feel of the words, okay? The lexical texture of the poem is astonishing in its intricacy. No, it isn't. No. As though the meshing of political and poetic fibres is somehow reflected in the consonantal weaving of the following line. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. And then Staffordshire University continue. The linguistic sonority of the line pivots both accentually and alliteratively around the plangent semi-vowel W, like a plain chant, and W, being somewhat liminal in phonetic quality, embodies the blended space Gorman creates in almost gospel gravitas. Okay, understand that? The simple fact is that what Amanda Gorman is doing is being pompous. She is raising the whole world. She's talking to and for the whole world, not just America. So I have every reason to object to this.
Rise from the gold-rimmed hills of the west, we will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution.
No, you don't realise revolution. You create revolution. You don't realise it. Again, alliteration for the sake of it. Lack of meaning.
Rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states who will...
I sort of quite like that phrase, lake-rimmed. I mean, it's quite nice. My one, did you hear it somewhere else? I don't know.
Rise from the sun-baked south, we will...
Sun-baked, that's a cliche.
Rebuild, reconcile, and recover.
Yes, alliteration. Rebuild, reconcile, recover.
Every known nook of our nation and every...
Okay. Staffordshire University, English and Creative Writing Department, they love that part of it as well. That bit about we will rise, yeah, okay. That's pompous, cliched language, but according to Staffordshire University, these are the power chords of a poem, seeped in multimodal sampling from phoneme to morpheme to phrase. The repetition of the anthemic phrase, we will rise, vaults through the lines to evoke a message of solidarity and activism. No, it's just pompous.
Every corner called out and recover, and every known nook of our nation, and every corner called our country.
Get that? Nook of our nation, corner called our country. Yeah, okay. I feel bronze pounded by that use of alliteration.
Our people diverse and beautiful will emerge battered and beautiful when they...
More bronze pounding.
Comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid.
Okay, bad rhyming, but I give her some credit. I think what she is doing is, now that she's bringing the poem to a close, she's bringing us back to the beginning. You remember when she said, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? Okay, I think what she's trying to say, the statement she's trying to make, the main theme is, everything seems dark, but if we walk out into the day aflame, burning ourselves, then we will be the light. Okay, that's what she's saying. That's the simple idea, and that's what she's trying to say in her clunky way.
The new dawn blooms as we free it.
No, you don't free the dawn. That's meaningless. It sounds good, sounds poetic. it's pompous, it's claiming credit where it's not due. I don't claim credit because the sun rises. This lady is, I mean, well, part of me thinks I wouldn't put it past her to claim credit for the sun rising, because she's very full of herself. Watch Anderson Cooper's fawning interview with her and her responses to it.
For there was always light, if only were
No, there isn't. There isn't during the night. You said there was never-ending shade, so no, you're wrong there.
brave enough to see it, if only were brave enough to be it.
Okay, that's another scriptural reference. It's very self-important. I get the impression that she is saying that she is the light and we can follow her example. I think that is influenced by Christ saying, "I am the light and the way. None will come to the kingdom of heaven other than through me." So something like that. Those kind of scriptural reference is intended to be subtle. For instance, or religious reference. If you look at Henry IV, Part 1, where Prince Hal says to Falstaff, "I do, I will," and it's like you know he's going to betray someone. He's going to be true to someone else. Who is it? Who does he mean by that? By echoing the words of the marriage ceremony. It's light, unobtrusive, and that makes it all the more. It's meant to be a bit more sinister and worrying. But this isn't. This is pompous, it's assertive, it's overblown, over assertive. But Staffordshire University, English and Creative Writing Department, they like it. And what they say now is, again, can you understand this? It is now apparent that Gorman is accessing and gathering the whole tapestry of American poetics and political discourse. Oh, is that right? Okay. To create a new poem for a new age, from the Whitman-esque listing of subjects, identities, cultures to the blues. Well, no, I prefer Willie McGonagall's ending, the worst poet in history, who wrote the worst poem in history, which has nevertheless stood the test of time, a century and a half. I prefer the ending to his poem. It may not, it's not very good, but you just can't help feeling affection for it. I must now conclude my lay by telling the world fearlessly, without the least dismay, that your central girders would not have given way, at least many sensible men do say, had they been supported on each side with buttresses. At least many sensible men confesses. For the stronger for the stronger we our houses do build, the less chance we have of being killed. Right? That's William McGonagall. He's lovely. He's a lovely. You can't help loving that guy. He's so nice. He's so humble and generous. He really feels for all these people who've been lost in that disaster, and you get the feeling that he wants his poem to contribute in a small way to advancing the cause of civil engineering. He's like he is the Frank Spencer of DIY. You can't sell tickets to watch me do DIY. You can sell tickets to watch Frank Spencer do DIY. And similarly with Willie McGonagall and bad poetry, he does it with a talent and a warmth and a kind of loveliness. That's why we're still reading him today. Unlike Amanda Gorman, I think Will Gompertz is completely wrong. I don't think we'll be reading this poem in 150 years' time. I think as a poem, it fails. I think it is domineering. I think it is one-sided and hypocritical. In that it claims to show unity, and it doesn't. To that extent, I think what it shows is it is emblematic of the BLM craziness that is overtaking us. Well, not only that, the poem itself, the fact that this lady was chosen to do this inauguration poem, and the fact that everyone, all celebrities and academics, have fallen over themselves to praise it to the skies, that shows how tight the BLM grip has become over us. And that's not going to work. That suggests to me that no matter how far you push it, that the culture of and ways of people of European origin will not mix with the culture and ways of people of African origin, that essentially European people and African people don't really belong together very well, and that in particular people of European origin have nothing to gain in the attempt.